Hope everybody's had a good morning so far, and I will introduce myself as well as my coworker, Dina Kalaji. My name is Sarah Coburn. I'm the Assistant State Veterinarian at the Department of Environmental Conservation. And I'm not sure who ended up being listed on the final agenda, but Dina Kalaji is the program coordinator that works with me at the Environmental Health Lab. And she had originally planned to speak, and then I had another conference that canceled, so I was able to participate as well. So Dina will be available on the chat. If there's any questions that come up along the way, she'll kind of be watching for that. If there's particular resources from our office that you're looking for, she'll be helping me with that. And then at the end, if there's questions, she'll be able to jump in as well and answer those if I need some help with that. So I'm glad that she's here. And I'm just going to give a brief kind of reminder about some of the produce safety rule things that are happening, an inspection update, and a little bit of where that's at now with the new situation, and where we're at with the Alaska Produce Safety Program. So let me see if I can share screen, hopefully, and have that available. Okay, I think. All right. So we have a very small office. Our state vet office is 3 of us, and Dina and I both work on a lot of different programs. So I always just like to bring up the One Health concept, which coincidentally is appropriate for our current pandemic situation as well. But just that idea that we collaborate and communicate across a lot of different disciplines in order to promote health for animals and humans and environmental health. So I always like to bring that up. And like I said, with the current pandemic too, I think looking for creative ways to work together and across some disciplines that maybe we don't always communicate with or work with day to day. Now is the time to really take advantage of those opportunities. So a lot of you are familiar with the Food Safety Modernization Act, but just as a reminder and a point of reference, this was a major food safety regulation that went into place in 2011. And specifically, the Produce Safety Rule was implemented in 2015. And the Produce Safety Rule is the first ever mandatory federal standard for the growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of fresh produce. And really, there's a transition with the whole Food Safety Modernization Act to looking at prevention of foodborne illness rather than responding after the fact. So hopefully, you know, it's a bigger picture systems approach to food safety. And we'll talk more specifically about the Produce Safety Rule and where that's at currently. Again, this is something that a lot of folks have seen before as far as who's covered under the regulation and who's not. And we encourage, we're a small state in a way for our size of our agriculture footprint. So we're able to provide a lot of resources to growers of all size farms, from the biggest to the smallest as well. So we encourage people to be involved. But just for a point of reference, if you're a grower that is selling on average over the past 3 years less than $25,000 of produce, you are exempt from the regulation. We encourage you to be involved and to be educated and using good practices, but technically not covered under the regulation. And we have a lot of growers. Well, I'm going to skip to the right side there. The fully covered farms are those that sell over $500,000 of food, or selling less than that, but majority are going through a distributor. And there's a series of regulations that pertain to them for food safety and inspections that will be taking place. A lot of our growers are in between in the qualified exempt category. So selling over $25,000 a year, less than $500,000 in food, and the majority of their sales are to an end user, which would be the consumer, directly to a consumer, to a restaurant or retail store. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So there's just a couple of things I want to bring up because those labeling requirements, there's for the qualified exempt category, there's only 2 requirements. One is that you keep records of your sales over those past 3 years. If there ever is a problem, you can say, hey, here's why I was not fully covered by the regulation and why, you know, your sales and your, if they went to a distributor or to an end user. And the other requirement, and this is the one that went into effect on January 1st, is for the business name and address to be provided to that end user. So that can be directly on the label of the product. It can be at the point of purchase, so at the farmer's market on your sign, or on an invoice if you're selling to a store. So like I said, that's kind of the biggest new thing. That date's been set for a long time, the January 1st date, but in case anybody wasn't aware of it, that did go into effect for qualified exempt farms to have the business name and address available on the label, point of purchase, or on the invoice. And just to list out those compliance dates again, and with those two for the qualified exempt producers, labeling, and again, the record keeping has been in place for a while. Pretty much all of the other size farms, compliance dates are in effect. The water portion for water testing has been postponed and I believe has still not been finalized. But even for the largest businesses, they're not mandated to do any testing even in 2022. So that's still out in the future a little bit. So inspections, and this is, again, a pretty big deal because this is new for produce farms, but they did start on those largest farms in 2019. And FDA is doing the international inspections, and for domestic producers, it's a combination of FDA doing those depending on the state and their agreement with FDA, and the majority of the states are doing them themselves. And there's a huge focus on it being educational and collaborative. There's no out to get people kind of mentality. It's really working with people to make sure they understand what the regulation says and what things they would need to do to be in compliance if they aren't already. And really an effort with the national, like NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, and all of the state governments working together to have a standardized approach to the inspection process. And there's been, over the past few years, there's been concern that it would be different. And then for some large farms in the lower 48 that have farms, properties in multiple states, what that's going to look like for them so that they're, everyone's being treated fairly. And again, looking at a systems view, they're not going through a checklist that, or a pass-fail kind of system for the inspection, because the idea is to look at the kind of the big picture of those practices. A lot of foodborne illness outbreaks in the past, it's not that one thing went wrong, it's that, sometimes a lot of small things go wrong to lead to contamination and then it being able to get into the final product. So those inspection experiences, from the standpoint of the inspector, from what we've heard.
Enter your meeting ID, followed by pound.
The majority of farms have met the minimum requirements. There's been some minor findings, and most of those findings have been able to be corrected on site or to be followed up voluntarily by the farm, after the fact, if it's not something that could be corrected right then. The intent with the inspections is they're happening when things are happening on the farm. It's not just talking to the manager and sitting and looking at, pieces of paper about what they're doing. Some of the folks are a couple hours and just kind of watching and seeing how things are going. And then at the end of that too, a lot of times they're able to provide some guidance materials or some other technical resources like extension that can help if there's something that they need to follow up with. Some of the things that have come up that they worked with farms, cut surface, harvested produce being in contact with the soil. So it is allowed for the produce to be cut and laid on the soil, but the cut surface, which is the most, would be able to absorb some contamination, potentially being put directly back in contact with the surface. Partially enclosed packing sheds and things with evidence of pests or birds roosting and fecal material. An inadequate pre-harvest assessment. So part of the rule is requires that before a particular field is harvested, that somebody is designated to go and look for any animal intrusion or evidence of bird feces or other contamination in the field. So there's one example where an inspector did a walkthrough and they actually found some contaminated produce that hadn't been identified previously. But again, they're not looking to get anybody. They had a conversation with the manager. Nothing had been harvested. There's no real follow-up at that point because they were able to address it before there was actually a problem. So working on the education there, stocking of hand washing stations, again, they're pretty simple things, and they're not, it's not a major overhaul of equipment or monetary investment. It's practices and being consistent with those good practices. Sanitizing without cleaning first, maybe just rinsing things off with a sanitizer without doing that cleaning step first, things like that, or improper use of sanitizers that has come up where they're either folks may not be monitoring the sanitizer during the day or not using the appropriate sanitizer for the activity that they're doing, or not using the concentration it's supposed to be used at. And then just the record keeping. A lot of farms have had really detailed records, but there might be a particular piece specific to the produce safety rule that wasn't included. For example, if they provided food safety training for their employees, but they didn't actually document which employees were there and what date and what information was provided. So again, on the big picture of things for rolling out a huge, inspection program that's a little bit different than what people have experienced before, it seems like it's gone pretty well. So from the standpoint of the grower, some of the comments that have come up, that they thought the inspectors' comments were reasonable and appropriate. They've appreciated the help and feedback. And some have said, well, there's still some unknowns. Like I said, the water rule is still kind of out there. Still some unknowns, but they really appreciate the conversation and the openness that the inspectors have shown. So common questions that have come up: is there a certificate? There is not. There's an inspection form that a producer will receive, but there's not a pass-fail certificate, or I think some have been asked by their buyer for certain things that aren't really part of this inspection program. Another question: how frequently will inspections be done? And that has not been established at this point. For Alaska, we're basically saying we have few farms that have to be inspected, and our intent is not that we will inspect them more frequently because we have fewer to do. We will do what other states are doing. I mean, it could be 2 years or 3 years, but it's not specified in the rule what that inspection and frequency has to be. So that's still kind of a question. And again, like I said, the growers that have been working with FDA in the other states, I think would like some more specifics on some of these things, but have appreciated, kind of just from the government standpoint, regulator standpoint, that people are open and trying to work through some of those details still. And at this time, related to the COVID pandemic, FDA has suspended all routine inspections. They still will be doing for-cause or foodborne illness outbreak inspections, and any states, that's included, that have a cooperative agreement grant funds from USDA or from FDA, we will not be doing any in-person voluntary on-farm readiness reviews or inspections at this time either. So basically all in-person on-farm activities are ceased unless there actually is a specific food safety concern that has to be followed up with. And that's, there's no date, it's until things change, I guess. So our program, we've got a great range of the local folks, the Cooperative Extension. We've got folks pretty much in all the major areas of the state that we're working with and are trained up on produce safety. Food safety and sanitation, we work with them a lot, as well as our national partners as well. So those good practices, they apply to the big farms that may have an inspection to verify that they're doing it, monitoring for intrusion into their fields, using appropriate sanitizers and equipment for post-harvesting and handling and sanitation, all those things. Those apply to everybody, and they still apply even with the situation that we're in right now with COVID. And I won't go into a big spiel on that, but just I wanted to share a couple of things that have come up on some other conference calls and meetings I've been in lately. So all those food safety things that we're already doing, the hand washing we're already doing, is protecting the food, and those are already in place and those will continue. The biggest transition for farmers is going to be protecting the employees and customers and preventing the spread with that social distancing in mind. So some things to think about if you aren't already, it depends on how you're set up and how many people you have working together, but start looking at some of the guidelines, working with food safety and sanitation, and see what protocols you can come up with on your own farm to protect your staff. One thing that's come up on some calls is the use of sanitizers and disinfectants, and they've cautioned to make sure you're using those according to label instructions. Again, work with DEC, food safety and sanitation, if you have any questions, or our office, but in an effort to disinfect everything in the world, make sure that you're not disinfecting a food contact surface with something that's not meant to be on a food contact surface. So really taking a look at those. And if you are changing any protocols, whether it's sanitizers or a glove policy or social distancing, whatever policies you are working with on your farm, make sure that you're documenting those. I know somebody, one of the speakers yesterday morning had mentioned that the more you can describe what actions you're taking and what your protocols are, the better it's going to be as you work with your local agencies and with your customers to be able to move forward. So any changes that you're making, make sure you're training your staff on those changes, and make sure that you are working with your customers too. So if there's different, whatever protocols at the farmer's market, make sure that people know what to expect when they get there so that they can prepare appropriately as well. And whatever things you're working on and moving forward, educate yourself, work with your local agencies, and make sure that those practices are science-based and based on the current guidelines to the best of what's available. So for our program, we have a lot of things scheduled for this spring and early summer, and they've really been pushed back to summer and fall. We will be continuing education and outreach. The on-farm readiness reviews are an in-person kind of consultation for producers that we're happy to do. We do those in conjunction with Cooperative Extension. And again, inspections for us as well. We have very few these first couple of years. It'll be, not many, but even whatever ones we had scheduled, potentially that would take place summer or fall. On-farm readiness reviews, again, that will be available later, and keep that in mind if that's something you would like some assistance with. Grower trainings, we've had to cancel 3 this spring, but I'm really appreciative for all you that have participated the last couple of years. We've had 17 actually, plus 1 more this spring, and over 225 participants. So it's a great, I think a great opportunity for people to learn some practices, get together with some other growers in their area. And again, all growers are welcome, not just those that are technically covered under the rule. So we probably will be able to offer those through next winter with the federal funding, and after that, yet to be determined financially what will be available. But at this time, if you see those come up next winter, maybe when things are back to normal, please participate in those. So that's really all I have for you. I'm happy to answer some questions. Like I said, I can't see the chat at the moment, but hopefully if you had any questions, Dina's been picking some of those up. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Coburn. Really appreciate it.
So this is Dina, just chiming in about one question that somebody brought up. They're concerned about being able to maintain a 6-foot distance in their harvest area. And there's some fun suggestions about hoop skirts and masks and gloves. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I've, in my position as the assistant, that we've been talking to veterinarians and about some of those same concerns, different environment, of course, but maintaining that 6-foot distance. So some clinics around the country are grouping their staff. So if normally they would have one technician working with, a different doctor during the day, they're staying with one veterinarian. So they're kind of restricting access to different, so those 2 are still working closely together, but they're separate from the other staff and not floating between as much. And I think there'll probably be more as we get moving forward with some guidance. I know Washington State was trying to put some things together, and it's going to be a little different on each farm. If you're family and you're all living together anyway, then that 6 foot distance isn't going to be as much an issue. If you're hiring a lot of people, you know, some producers are looking at not hiring as many people just to eliminate for, you know, period of time. But you're right. I mean, that 6 foot distance, depending on the activity, is going to be challenging. So then you really have to ramp up the hand washing. And really that not having people come when they're sick. I know there's some concern about asymptomatic spread, but symptomatic for sure. There's no question they don't come. And you can, you know, there's some potential for, you know, again, I'm thinking of bigger farms where they're doing some health screenings as people are coming in, or transporting people back and forth if you can separate people a little bit during that period of time. So it's a challenge for sure. I think that's going to be something, yeah, pretty much every state and every farm is going to be trying to work through.
Another question just came up about recording our grower trainings for people to watch later. So just wanted to touch on that. We have some restrictions in the way that we can do that. I'll let you talk about it more, but there's reasons that we can't do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're working, the Produce Safety Alliance through Cornell had already been working on an online style delivery. The in-person class is about 7 to 8 hours. Their online format is going to be like 20 hours of work to 30 because they want discussions and ways to make sure people are really interacting and getting that information. So at this time, I'm not sure that we probably aren't looking at offering that because I think the benefit, I mean, half the benefit or what people comment on during the grower trainings is an opportunity to get together with other growers as well, depending on the region. They may not get to do that very often. And we don't, as far as the folks that are regulated and have to take that, as far as we know, all those people have taken it. So at this time, we're really looking at postponing it until there's an opportunity to do it in person, because there's so much benefit to doing the course in person. As far as just recording it and watching it, like Dina said, there's restrictions on that, because for some people it is a part of what they have to do. So they have to be able to verify that the person was there for all the modules, and that has to be documented with more of a Zoom format where you can see everybody during the day. So there's not really an option for just a you know, to watch the recordings. If anybody has any particular questions, we can talk through those as far as food safety practices on their farm. But as far as the grower training, I think we're just gonna, here in Alaska, we'll just wait till we're able to do those in person again.